Grieving the loss of a loved one is a very difficult thing to walk through. And today, I want to talk about the spiritual connection between an individual and the loved one that they've lost.
This is your moment. This is your moment in time. This is your moment. This is your moment.
Let me just say this first. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm not a therapist. What I am is I'm an intuitive medium who has done intuitive sessions, intuitive readings for people who have lost loved ones for years. Talking 15 years, I did readings. And I very early on started to see a pattern of what was happening between individuals who had lost their loved ones and the loved ones that were now on the other side. This pattern developed early, and then it sparked me to start asking some questions to my guides and really meditate and sit with what's going on here. And I want to share that with you today because I want to put out there another possibility or just another concept to sit with. Grief is brutal, absolutely brutal. It's extremely painful. Everyone goes through their grief process in their own unique way. No two people go through the process the same. But overall, I think we can all agree that it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. And here's the pattern that I saw as an intuitive. And I saw this again very early on when I started to understand really what was happening, which I'm going to try to share with you today. That's when it started to make more sense. And I realized through this pattern, which I'll describe, but I realized how important our not only our spiritual path is, but our human path is too. Let me explain. Here was the pattern. An individual would come into my office and they had recently lost somebody who they deeply, deeply cared for and loved. And they were struggling because they weren't able to feel them or sense them around them. And this was a really difficult thing because when I first started, because I wasn't always open, as you know, if you followed me at all so far, I was complete skeptic up to the age of 32. I opened up intuitively, and here I am today. So for me, I wasn't always open to this, and I understood what they were saying. Why can't I feel them? Why can't I see them? I want to sense that they're around. And for many of these individuals, they've already had spiritual experiences or their intuition was already open. So they know the experience of getting intuitive messages or sensing that someone's near them. Yet here they are with the loss of someone very close to them, and they can't feel that person. They can't feel the person. The person has passed away, and all they want is to sense their presence. But no matter what they do, they really, really struggle sensing that person around them. And they would come to me or to other, individuals, professionals, and professional intuitives and say, are they around? Are they okay? Now, personally, I think this is a good reason to have a session with an intuitive. I do, but I really want you to hear me out on this to understand why it's difficult right after the death of a loved one to sense them intuitively. There's actually something going on. Okay, so I've sat with all of these clients and over again, the same thing. Maybe they had a quick connection with them right around the time of the death or the day after, but then after that, it just feels like silence, like they can't connect again. They don't feel their presence and they're going through grief. This is very difficult for them. And over, I heard them say, which is very understandable, if I could just feel them, I would feel better. If I could just know that they're around, I would feel better. And I gotta tell you, as a human being, absolutely, I hear you loud and clear. That's it. I get it. It makes complete sense. I want the same thing too. Someone close to me that I love dearly passes, I just want to know that they're okay. But this pattern emerged where many people were saying this. Either they did or they didn't feel them at first, felt their presence, or they were visited by them right after their death, and then nothing. And then it was just like felt empty and hollow. So I went to my guides and I said, okay, what's going on here? Because this isn't one or two. I'm starting to see this consistently, and I'm doing my best to connect as an intuitive. Sometimes it's difficult to connect with somebody who has also, this is what I'm saying to my guides, sometimes I'm having a tough time connecting with somebody who has just recently passed away. Why is that? So I had all these questions that I decided I was going to sit down and really kind of sink into these to try to understand them. Well, my guide explained it to me, and I didn't like the explanation at first, I'll be honest with you. So I'm on your side with this when you hear what he had to say. But he explained that there's something like a grief wall, like a wall in between the person who's still living and the loved one who's now on the other side. It was almost like a barrier, you know? Think of like a translucent but cloudy barrier, right? My guide said their loved one on the other side is right there with them, which gave me comfort. However, it's hard to connect because of the grief wall, the wall of grief. And I didn't really like that answer. I'm going to be very direct about that. My first response was, "Hey, drop the wall, right? Let their loved one connect with them and let them be able to feel and sense the presence of their loved one because that'll bring them comfort." And my guide, who was very smart, said, or it's not that he's smart, it's just that he knew and understood it on a level that I didn't at the time. Grief is a human experience that we do need to walk through. And a grief wall will go up when we need that human time to process the loss and to adjust to being here in this agreed upon reality without this person we so dearly love. And that's hard. That's difficult. The way that I kind of came to terms with this concept of a grief wall, because, you know, my personality goes right to, well, that's not fair. Drop the grief wall. Let them comfort them. That's not fair. They shouldn't feel if they can help. But upon diving into it a little deeper, I understood. I understood that grief is so intense on our human path. It's a linear emotion that we do have to walk through. Grief is absolutely connected to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday timeline. It is on the timeline. It's a human experience. And we do need to get from A to B, right? To process through some of the pain, to let some of that pain run through us. In some senses, to let it settle. As many people know who've lost somebody very close to them, it never really goes away in most cases. It just takes a break in between for a little bit, but it will always, from time to time come back. And that's that pull on the heartstring. But the initial period of grief, which for some is a few days, for some is a few years. Okay. Everyone does it differently. Everyone walks through this process differently and experiences their own grief in their own unique way. When that initial time passes, when the individual is able to function a little bit with a little bit more ease, and some of that heaviness is lifted, that's when the grief wall will come down. That's when people start to sense their loved one around again, perhaps even see them, get messages from them, feel their presence, which is the most common. And if you've ever lost a loved one and had some time under your belt processing through some of the grief, again, it's not a complete solution. Grief doesn't completely always go away, but process at least through some of it. You're probably nodding, going, "Yeah, I've felt their presence. I know that they're with me. I feel it. I feel more complete." That's because the grief wall has gone down. Well, the way that he explained it to me, from a different perspective also made sense. If the grief wall wasn't there, many of us, and I totally understand this, many of us might not process through that initial cycle of grief because we could use that as a way to hold still. And in the end, we don't want anyone to be frozen or hold still or not be able to move forward on their path. With that said, it's still difficult to say to someone, yeah, you're processing through this initial grief and that might hold you back, which is why I don't say that. I don't say that to somebody who has just recently lost someone. I don't say, well, connecting with them, might slow down your grief process. That's just wrong. But instead, love, support, wherever you're at, I'm right here by your side. Whatever you need, I'm right here by your side. That is the best way to process through it. And for intuitives out there who do this work, if somebody comes to you and they have lost somebody and it's very recent, and you as an intuitive, you have a hard time connecting with that person on the other side, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. That's that grief wall. That's that, hey, we need to allow this person, how painful it is, I understand, but we need to allow this person to be in their human path, to focus on the human process of grief, how to function without this individual in the agreed upon reality with us. The individual's not gone, but they're no longer in this material world with you. And that transition is one that somebody needs to walk through. So I've heard some readers say, oh, you can't read, you can't connect with a loved one who's crossed over recently. And spot on. On a rare occasion, you can, because the transition period is very quick. Again, everyone grieves differently, and there's no judgment around that. I know people who their love of their life passed, and within a week they felt fine. I mean, fine is not the accurate word for it, right? But they felt back on, and they could get back into their path, and they walked through most of their grief very quickly. And I can say that because I met a client who had that happen and actually came to me and said, I feel guilty. I feel guilty that my grief was so short. Is there something wrong? It's like, no, your grief, everyone's grief is different and everyone processes differently. So, as a reader, yeah, there's an occasion where somebody who passes recently, either they weren't very close to the individual that you're doing a reading for, or the grief transition, that initial huge impact of grief, that transition has been walked through, even though the death is still recent, then you will be able to connect with the loved one on the other side. But for many cases, especially somebody that was deeply close to somebody, if somebody has passed very recently, it'll be hard for you to read that person as well. Because if you go around that grief wall and all of a sudden get all the information that the person wants, even though the person doesn't have the direct connection with their loved one on the other side, they still have you as a phone line, right? So that's the grief wall. I learned about it very early on. And when people ask me now today, I just lost someone recently. What do I do? Can I talk to them? Why can't I feel them? Where's their presence? I'll tell you, I don't bring out the whole concept of the grief wall. They don't need to hear that right then and there. What they need to hear is all of the truths around their relationship with that loved one. They are right there by your side. You might not be able to feel them or hear them right now or sense them, but they are right there. And one day you will be able to. They are right there. They are loving you. They're not gone. They've just transitioned. They're the same person, just without the body. And they love you dearly. They're watching over you. These are all truths. So I don't focus on the limitation that the person is experiencing. I focus on reminding about the love and the connection. It is there, and just trying to assure them of that. With that said, I want to go all the way back to grief is hard. It's really hard. It's really tough. And when somebody's going through that initial transition of grief, just show up by loving them, loving them, loving them. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to adjust their grief. Don't try to ease their grief. Don't try to, loving them will ease some of that process, will make some of it better. Because in the end, if you look at the pure energy of loss, showing up for someone and being present in the way that they need you to be present for them, not the way you need to be present for them to make yourself feel better, to make them feel better, but the way that they need you to show up for them, that's going to soften some of that feeling of loss, because they will feel that somebody is present for them. So that's always my advice on, what do you do as a reader, an intuitive, when someone's just recently lost somebody? You remind them of the truths, that they are right there with you, that death is not the end. It's a different form, and then acknowledge their pain. Absolutely. Yes, it is devastating and it is brutal. And I know you feel that pain. They love you and they're right there. What can I do for you? How can I support you? And sometimes supporting somebody means, leaving them alone for a little bit. You know what I mean? So let's just honor the person's, process and what they're going through. But the it was enlightening to understand about the grief wall, and it helped me to be able to encourage people to be in that humanness. This is where I'm going to bring it all the way back from what I said initially. Our human path is just as important as our spiritual path. And disappearing into the spiritual path in such a transitional human experience, such as death, is not healthy, and it won't help somebody in their human path. So when you're human, be human, right? And feel it and be in it. And lastly, I'll say this: what I've seen over the years is that pain and that devastation is a direct reflection of how much care and love and positive energy is between you and that other individual. Albeit they're not here, that's equal to how much you loved them and cared about them. So, when it comes to grief, it's hard. It's difficult. It's very hard. But everyone does it differently. Everyone is unique in their grief path. Their grief path, their human path is very important. And if I leave you with anything, it's to know that when somebody close to you passes, they're always still with you. They're by your side. They're watching over you and loving you. And they're giving you the space that you need to find a little bit more strength. We're all connected. We're all love. So when a connection changes, it makes, painful waves. And we just need to make sure that we're there for each other during that time. And when that transition time has passed, you will feel them again. You will feel their presence. You will know that they're there. And you'll continue your relationship with them in a different form, because we're all love.
This is your moment.